Welcome to Why Is This Good? A podcast by the Naples Writers Workshop. I'm Christine and I'm here with John. Hey, John.
Hello.
All right, it is my turn, and I did not choose this story, but it is one that was submitted to us. It is called Sorrel House by Zach Williams, and it was featured in The New Yorker in 2022. Had you read this one before, John?
I had never encountered this story before.
Neither had I. It was a pleasure. The first time Jacob went exploring, he returned with rabbit skins, ragged and patched with gore, hanging from his bag. I figure I'll get better at it, he apologized, letting them fall to the porch. That night, Rona put Max to bed by herself. Jacob was too exhausted, and then they talked on the couch in the den, he with his head across her lap. I found a lake, he said. You follow the stream down the mountain to where it levels, then on a little ways, and then it opens up, all at once, onto the water. I saw the sun glinting on the surface through the trees and thought I was dreaming, or dead. The water's cold and clear. There are fish in it. She whispered, fish? It was somehow astounding. Jacob said he wanted to find the edge if there was one. If it turned out that Sorrel House was in the real world, then the edge would be a road or a town. It would be the edge of their seclusion. If instead the place was something constructed, the edge might be more literal. Such a discovery would be horrifying. But then at least he would be able to map the interior. I wonder, he said, if it's automatically generated somehow. Maybe it's creating itself as I go. Like I could walk for the rest of my life and it'd just be different configurations of the same trees, the same hills. But maybe not. Maybe if he walked far enough, he'd find a change in the pattern. Imagine if there were cities. They might be strange to us. The people in them might not be people exactly. There might be anything out there, enough to fill lifetimes. Rona ran her fingers through his hair. I tried to stick Max with a sewing needle today. I wanted to see if I could hurt him, you know? Feeling her voice shake, she bit her cheek. I was scared because what if I could? But I told myself that the way to take care of him sometimes is by hurting him, like an inoculation. Bent over his crib, she'd held the needle above the soft underside of his forearm. But I kept dropping it, she said. I couldn't do it. And I didn't know if it was me or him or the place. I really wanted to do it. I kept trying. Jacob lay with his eyes closed. I climbed the high mountain. Yeah, she wiped her cheeks with her shirt sleeve. I got above the tree line. I could see in every direction. She waited. Nothing but trees. I could see the lake. I could see other mountains, a chain, but it's wilderness. It's all wilderness. Miles and miles. No roads. Nothing. Could you see us? She asked. The house? Her mind ran over the day. Max atop her shoulders, leaning to pull a birch leaf from its stem, his outstretched arm before her. Jacob opened his eyes. Who's accountable for this? Absently, she pressed her thumb to his lips. He kissed it and she pressed again, wanting him to open his mouth for her. She ran her left hand down his chest to his belt and began to pull at the buckle. He seized her wrist and flung it away.
I like that you read that section because I feel like that's like one of those moments when they stop communicating. He like doesn't hear her when she talks about what she's doing to Max. And that,
Yeah.
that kind of like indicates where the split starts to, I mean, not even starts, but like becomes very apparent.
Yeah, I thought this is like the clearest example of how the two of them are each dealing with this scenario. And the scenario is one that, did you read the interview with this writer?
No, I missed that.
Well, it's okay. I had so many questions about what the purpose of it was because I thought very early on that I had a really good idea and I like my interpretation better than his, okay? Sorry, Zach.
Oh man, no
Yeah.
interpretations.
Well, like I was reading this as a massive metaphor for grief. And in my mind, this child Max was dead. So the premise of the story is that this entire family, this nuclear family, Rona, Jacob, and Max, are suddenly at this like cabin that I think they've gone to before, but maybe not.
No, they don't have no idea how they got there.
They have no idea how they got there, but like they cannot escape it. They've lost track of time entirely. Max will not age, but the two of them continue to age. And the entire time they're like losing their grip on reality and trying to figure out a like way to understand what's happening and whether or not they can escape. And like in this situation, Jacob is like, I got to figure this out. I'm going to explore. I'm going to solve the riddle. And Rona is just like so consumed in trying to figure out what is going to happen to their son because she doesn't care what the premise is anymore. She realizes she's aging and her son hasn't learned a single new word since he's gotten there, can't fend for himself, is like perpetually, like, I forget, a year and a half or two. And she knows that one day they will die the way things are going and he's going to be by himself. And what's going to happen? How does she protect him? And I kind of thought, like, maybe this is like this mass. I thought I had really cracked it early on. I was like, God, I'm brilliant. This is two people dealing with grief in wildly different ways. Max is already dead. They're in this perpetual state of trying to figure out what to do with their life next. And all Jacob can do is look out there. He doesn't want to listen to his wife on the couch. She's saying, like, how do we keep this like child safe and happy and healthy. And he's like, how do I escape this feeling altogether? You know, she's like grappling with like the reality in a way, and he wants to solve for it. And she's kind of like accepted it. Whether or not she's accepted it, she knows that like there's an immediate consequence that needs to be dealt with. And he's kind of like, how do we get out of here? And she's like, well, we're here either way. Like, be here with me and try to help me with Max. So I thought it was like about grief. And then I read this interview with Zach Williams, and he's like, I don't know. And the interview is very much about like how as a writer, he too had to kind of suspend belief and not answer his own questions, not worry too much about how he got there. And so I think in another version, he had a story that started where they arrived at the cabin and they had a memory of doing so. And instead, this version is just like, just drop him in there, you know, and just kind of see what happens. I think that's a good sort of takeaway. But either way, I thought, like you said, this is like a really good moment in the story where, like you said, two people start to very obviously miscommunicate. And whether or not it's a story about grief or whatever you want it to be about, it's a really good example of a type of conflict that we talk about all the time that shows up in dialogue. People completely missing the point, people suffering in like quiet ways and loud ways. I mean, in one sense, you can watch Rona literally wiping tears and Jacob not noticing and thinking to yourself, what a cold, harsh dude right now. He's being such a jerk. But then also she tries to make out with him and he's like, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
You know, he's
Yeah.
like, what are you doing? Like, whether or not he's like grieving in that moment the way she is, he's still dealing with something that she can't appreciate. They've completely lost the plot here. And no one's saying that they should be behaving any differently. This is a bizarre scenario. But, you know, absent of this being like sci-fi or any other kind of like genre, it's just a really good study in like two people. There's only three characters on this page, on this whole
Yeah,
story.
this reminds me, first of all, back to what you were saying about, you said the exact same thing about Town of Birds when you're like, I figured it out. And then you read the interview and it's like, damn it. So
Yeah, I
it's
ruined it.
like,
I only read the interviews when I want confirmation, not when I'm like, am I right? I'm like, God, I'm right. I can't wait to read the exact words where they tell me I'm right.
that's right. But so I like that you brought up science fiction or just thinking of speculative fiction in general or fantasy fiction especially is there's a certain kind of, all right, there's a distinction like old fantasy fiction, like fairy stories and stuff were very, even myths, mythology. Think about the Greek myths and stuff. Those were very much, you didn't get character interiority. Characters didn't really have a psychology because their psychology is manifested externally. The monsters they face, monsters they have to overcome are manifestations of something within them. And so that's what mythology is like. You take the inside and you put it outside. And a lot of modern fantasies is more concerned with the psychology of the characters. It kind of like takes on that realist perspective, like the kind of stories that a New Yorker would post where it's like about the interiority of characters. So this story is in a lot of ways in that vein. Like it doesn't matter, it kind of matters, but it doesn't really matter what things represent. They're out there. They're things that the characters have to overcome. That's like the things that should be inside of them that would be like a deeply ruminative story become, I need to go out into the world to overcome whatever it is. And
Yeah.
like, this is why he has to go out in the world and explore, and she eventually has to go out in the world and explore.
Yes.
Like they both have to confront this terrain, this like endless forest and what's beyond it, and the lake and everything else, and just the things that are happening out in the world, because that's the way in which they are confronting what's happening inside of them.
So to that point, like the other part of the interview is that he basically wanted to write about just the wild world of parenting and
Yeah.
like raising your first child and not knowing if you're doing it right and being concerned with like wildly different outcomes for the kid, you know? And if you want to interpret it in that lens, then this like external terrain, as you called it, which is like a good, that's exactly what it is, you know? It's a cabin and like, it's like the earth. It's like the Truman Show, but without a
Yeah.
city. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there's a dome over this little part of the wilderness and they're trying to figure out if that holds the key. But like you said, this could be like a story mostly in a character's head and it would be a completely different reading experience. And instead, you know, the conflict is tangible and it's in real life and a lot more immediate that way. But if you think about it with what he is sort of hinting at, you know, the idea that like you don't know if what you're doing is right for your kid, it's also just a huge metaphor, right? We don't really directly talk about parenting.
Oh
She's
yeah.
talking about what is going to happen to her child after she is gone, but she's not thinking about it like she's got cancer and her kid's 15 and she's not going to be at his wedding in 5 years. She's like, I think I might be 65 years old right now, and Max has not learned a single new word, and he does
Yeah.
not know how to make food for himself, and he still uses diapers. Like, that is a wildly different approach. And I imagine it's a real stage in parenthood. I'm not a parent where your kid is helpless without you, you know?
Yeah.
And that part has got to be one of the most overwhelming overwhelming parts, you know? You hope and pray that you're not screwing your kid up on a regular basis by telling them things, but there's also this like fragile state where they're not thinking about big picture stuff or ideas or concepts. They haven't formed ideas about religion. You haven't completely screwed them up yet by saying things to them. And yet you still could be like abandoning them in a way or not serving their needs daily, right? Like she feels a ton of grief when she leaves him in his room and realizes that like he still hasn't gotten out of the crib. She does like a couple things where she's trying to test his abilities. At one point, she sees him fall down the stairs and then realizes that didn't hurt him. You know, she's like testing the bounds of like what is going to hurt Max, and that too is, I imagine, like a level of like stress that you actually have.
I think that's like the core of what she and his disagreement or the conflict between them comes from, is that she's so focused on Max, on the kid, on the baby, and like how to figure out what's going on with him. And Jacob is so focused on the world that he leaves Max behind. He leaves both of them behind like
Yes,
endlessly.
but yeah, exactly. Both of them.
And eventually just disappears out into the world. He's just trying to figure out the world. He's like, we need to figure this out. We need to confront this. And she's trying to figure out the kid.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's only to say that the story is focused on her, which is obvious because she's the character through the whole thing. Jacob disappears and like he's almost an obstacle to her, or becomes one. But the disjunction comes from that, the two different directions of where they're looking.
I wonder too if like I can see a version of this where it's not just about two partners that are miscommunicating and having like wildly different like preoccupations with their current situation, but it also maybe is like it speaks to like larger parenting roles where the mother is all consumed by the safety of her child imminently, and the father seeks like stability and like his ability to provide, his ability to like go out into the world and bring back the rabbit skins and go out into the world and say like we are or we aren't safe here. You know, like I listen to so many podcasts about like the way marriages crumble when kids are introduced, and it's because like there's at the core like a disconnect between like what mothers are preoccupied with and what fathers feel like they can contribute, you know, like whether it's like stereotype or not. So like in some ways it's like you said, he's concerned with like figuring this out, and in other ways it's like that's the only thing he knows how to do to help. Maybe he's not like emotionally equipped to handle the reality that she is, and maybe he knows it, and so he needs to leave the house every day.
Yeah. I mean, even part of what he does is like he kills that snapping turtle and like tries
Yeah.
to cook it. And then when she can't, she's like, I can't eat this. And he makes that comment about like, your mother's not really made up for this kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? So in that moment, he's done these things. He's brought it back to the kid. That's the last time they see him. That's the last time he's in the story. And like, I think that whole section starts off with a line something like, the last time he returned, he brought the dead turtle. So he's trying, even though his focus is out here, he does bring it back to the kid here and there. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned the turtle, so it's like this like symbol sort of, but also for the characters, there's wildlife, but like they point out they don't know which robin is returning each day to the yard. You know what I mean? It could be the same bird, it could be a million birds, it could be a new bird. But the one thing they're for sure about is like this snapping turtle. And she's right about how it could be 100 years old. Like I read something once about them recently where it was like the likelihood of a snapping turtle baby surviving to like age 1 is like 1 in a million, but once they get there, they almost always become this apex predator, and they almost always live to like 100 years old, like without human interaction. So when he kills it, he is like interrupting what would otherwise have been just this long, happy life for this like top predator. And he does it as this bizarre experiment. And for the wife, it's like this jarring, kind of horrible thing. Like you wanted to like mess with something that felt solid in this reality, right? To kind of see if you could learn something. And all we learned is that we don't like the way turtle tastes. And then, like you said, and I didn't remember it until you said it, like that's like the last time he's on the page. It's almost like he doesn't get punished for it, but like he is pushing the bounds of what he is willing to do now in this scenario to figure out what's wrong. And then he, like you said, is literally coming back to the house every day, but then he just doesn't come back. It's like he finally goes far enough. And they never like really say like, was it old age? Is he lost? Did he solve it? Did he die of an accident? But then she's kind of left there and she has to then do the same thing. And she ends up, like you said, exploring on her own. But it's like there's something like very special about the turtle. Like he upset some kind of like real world order that existed in this messed up place. And it couldn't be the same after that.
You asked like, or you brought up the question of what happened to him. The way I thought of it was that he is always looking outward. He's always trying to like explore the world in order to figure it out. And that exploration just took him too far away. That exploration was too much outward focus that he just eventually is not going to come back. He's going to be fixated on that exploration. He's just going to
It's
go to
like
the ends
a
of the world.
conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, something like that. Like he just loses himself in it. And if it's like what she found when she went out there and it's just that darkness, he's in the darkness with Quinn at the end too, right? But
Yeah.
when she goes out there, she takes Max, right? She tries
Yes.
to get away for a while. She goes to the lake and like, I'm going to try to ignore that baby and like whatever's going to happen to it. But she can't forget about him. She can't leave him behind. It drives her crazy. She runs back and discovers him like in the crib. She tries to do that so many times and every time she's pulled back. So eventually when she does leave, she has to
Yeah.
bring him with her. And that's the only way she's capable of walking away is to have him with her. So that's the divergence again, where Jacob is always looking to leave and she's always looking to stay with Max.
Yeah.
He's figuring out the world. She's figuring out Max. It's a really interesting story. I don't think there's an interpretation.
Yeah, yeah. My takeaway is just kind of like that. I think, like, I'm obviously not right about this, like, interpretation of, like, grief, but when I ended
It
up, like,
fits.
reading, yeah, and what I felt like my takeaway was when I thought that's what it was headed toward was this idea that, like, sometimes science fiction is a type of story that, the world begs a question and you answer, like, what if? And that can be sci-fi. And then sometimes, like, sci-fi and sometimes fantasy, but I think kind of less so. Fantasy seems very, like, I don't know, almost like obsessed with their own writer's like creation of like, look what I created on my own. I'm not bound by science. It's my own little brain. Look at these
Oh,
hobbits I created. Do you know what I mean? It feels like, I don't know, selfish sort of. Sci-fi feels like it's for everyone. Like everyone worries about what happens after death. That's for everyone. Only one person has come up with hobbits, right? Look at my hobbits.
everyone tried to copy him though.
Yeah, and then also like look at my dragon. It's different than the other dragons. Like, oh, who
These are
cares? Who cares?
vampires.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I get kind of annoyed with that where it's like, okay, you're still doing the same thing. Anyway, complete tangent. My thought reading it was that sometimes sci-fi is a way to explore like an extended metaphor. And like if this is an extended metaphor of grief, one way to do it is to like put them in a scenario where they are trapped in a weird world. And how do they deal with that? They deal with it through this lens of X, Y, and Z. It sort of reminded me too of the story that we read, like the Power and Light story, where like the couple breaks up after like several conversations at night in the dark while the power is
Oh,
being worked on at their apartment. It feels
Jumpa
insular that
Lahiri.
way. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that one. And we I think we really
A
enjoyed that
temporary
one.
matter, I think it's called something like
Yes.
that.
So it's like, okay, we have this week of no power. We're going to have these deep, intimate conversations. We're going to come together and grow further apart. And ultimately, like, that's all that happens. But it's like this bizarre scenario that, like, illuminates literally the problems in that marriage. And here it's like, if we want to explore, like, the deep rift that these characters either had coming into it or develop, I think they kind of develop it. There's moments where they're kind of very much on the same page trying to figure this out together. And then they, like you said, he's like conspiracy theorist into the woods on his own, all consuming. But like the premise, the sci-fi premise of like putting them in a very difficult situation allows us to explore in a really interesting way what is otherwise, like we said, maybe a very insular story. One that all happens in the character's mind instead of like with a plot. Or you could give me like a plot that like frankly I might not care about. Like, oh no, I took Max to school today and someone else stabbed him with a needle. You know what I mean? How do we protect our child? I'd be like, oh god, it's so boring. This is why I don't have kids, so I don't have to think about this. But I'm kind of into the sci-fi part of it. I'm kind of into the, oh my god, any of us could be dropped into a cabin with a cooler that replenishes food automatically. What a terrifying thing. Right now it sounds kind of nice, but not for 100 days.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think my takeaway is along the same lines, but slightly
Okay.
different. Because I was thinking what I was talking about with how fantasy stories, mythology mostly, like old school fantasy, if you want to put it that way,
Yeah.
before the realist turn where it was kind of psychologizing characters, where the internal becomes external. I think that's an interesting way to think about stories. And like you said, you can invent your hobbits, you can invent whatever you want to invent that like it can represent an internal thing. But the kind of caveat or twist I would put on that is that it doesn't have to be a concrete one for one analogy or metaphor. It could just be the thing in the world that kind of like feels like something. You know, making her have to care for a baby makes it very concretely about taking care of a baby. It makes it very concretely
Yes.
about being a parent. So if you make the thing in the world very concretely something, that is what it is. But you can make them more vague, you can make it more concrete in whatever way you need to for whatever story you want to tell. But putting it out in the world, I think, rather than being internal, is an interesting way to approach those stories. It's kind of my takeaway is thinking about it in those terms, not in a genre way, not as like this is what fantasy fantasy is, but as
Yeah.
a storytelling possibility of way to tell stories. Because mythologies were not considered genre fiction. They're just, it's mythology.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes I feel like I can't enjoy a story that doesn't have a definitive sort of answer. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I get really annoyed, especially like when I know it's like a workshop story and you can easily tell yourself like this is an amateur writer. Of course they don't have an answer for me, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And then like there's stories like this where it's
It's obviously not amateur.
yeah, it's obviously not, it's accomplishing something, and whether or not I'm totally off about it, it almost like doesn't matter in this sense. I don't know how Zach would feel about my interpretation. He might be one of those like writers that's like, that's great. I love that you feel that way. I'm not one of those writers though, so I get
Yeah.
really miffed when like somebody wildly misinterprets it. But like regardless, yeah, this pulls something off that I don't need to have all the answers to the concept, the premise, and I also don't need to have the answer to like the consequence to have really felt something. I felt like I was on the verge of tears at one point because it feels so hopeless.
It's affecting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like once they have come to term with not what's happening and why, but just what's inevitably going to come of this scenario. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. If like the apocalypse happens and you don't really know why, at some point it doesn't matter. You know, you stop caring about who set the bomb off because this is your new reality. And
Gotta find water.
yeah, so this also felt like Cormac McCarthy's like The Road, which is like the most devastating book I think I've ever read. Like post-apocalypse, he's raising his kid and then his kid has to go on without him and that is always it's so devastating. And this felt similarly devastating to me. So whether or not it was a metaphor, whether or not I understand like the concept of the world, whether or not I appreciate that an apocalypse is going to happen for Cormac McCarthy's book to come to fruition, there's like something like just so sad about these realities. And even like the post-apocalyptic type world, that is a premise that we have not yet had to experience, but we think about it all the time. And we think about it all the time because it's a really interesting lens in which to view our daily struggles.
Okay. As a parent who had to do like hour-long searches for dollies when the little ones were 2 or 1, I still remember the places I found these dollies, right? The dumbest places, the craziest things. But just thinking about Quinn out there in the dark and poor little Max, kind of sad about missing Dolly at the end there.
Yeah.
But one thing that this helps me think about these things is like whether or not it needs to have an interpretation is I always think about what Tolkien said. And I read it on the, when we did Leaf by Niggle, I brought it up. He wrote in the forward to the Lord of the second edition Lord of the Rings, he said, this is where he famously says, I dislike allegory whenever I detect it. But he said people often confuse allegory for applicability. They think that a story is an allegory because X equals Y, you know, A equals B. You can like make these one-to-one distinctions. Like this is what it stands for. But he says, but applicability is just whatever you feel like it attaches to for your experience. It can be about that for you. And that's fine. The story doesn't, it's not like limiting it by saying it can only be this one thing. It's like open in the fact that you can apply it to whatever you need to apply it to or whatever makes sense to you as you read it.
Yeah, you can take what works and like kind of get rid of what doesn't as long as like you're feeling something. That's kind of the point for a lot of writers.
Yeah, for me, I don't like to have stories that have those correlations, like a one-to-one correlation. And I read a story like this, I don't even think about what it could possibly mean. But especially a story like this that is so expansive, where there are no obvious correlations, like the concrete baby is a baby, like that's enough. So everything that revolves around relationships with babies comes into play because there's a mother, there's a father, there's all this stuff. So that's all concrete, and that's not a correlation. That's just in the story. But as far as like what it all means beyond that, you can just take that wherever you want.
Right.
And I look at it, I just take it concretely. Like this is a story about a baby. They're in a cabin. They're in the woods. She walks. There's a lake. There's darkness. That's what's in the story. That's what I'm reading. And I don't try to apply it elsewhere. I don't know. That's my approach.
Yeah, I struggle with that. Just maybe it's just a personal thing.
Yeah.
But
Oh, yeah.
also
Yeah.
as a writer, like I know what I intend, so it baffles me when other writers don't intend that. Yeah. And maybe I've been in enough work. We've both been in enough workshops where like somebody gets it totally wrong and like the writer's annoyed and you're like, well, then there must be an answer.
Yeah, if you want there to be an answer, you gotta make that answer in there. It's like
Right.
if there is a reading for your story that every reader shouldn't be able, even if they miss it or whatever, they should be able to get it from your story without too much work.
Yeah,
Otherwise, they're
right.
going to read it how they're going to read it.
Yeah, and there's something concrete enough about this, like it's a deep enough dive. It explores a concept and a premise like thoroughly enough that like we don't need to know the answer necessarily.
Yeah.
And whether or not it's like sci-fi, it's like speculative fiction.
Yeah, I don't know what I would call it genre-wise. I mean, it's in the New Yorker, so it's just literary fiction.
He also denies having chosen a genre. I was like, Zach, do you want to be slapped?
Well, he can't be genre if he's in the New Yorker. Like
Yeah,
they
exactly.
would say, no, we're not printing that. It's all marketing. Genre is just marketing.
It's like, I think it could be YA with the right cover.
This is middle grade.
Yeah, you're right. This is middle grade. Yeah. Point being, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So,
It was
do you
very
guys have
good.
other ones that you want to suggest?
I might cut this out and just make it into a Patreon thing, but I did want to mention this. I had this weird reaction to when I read this. It's after the first break, section break.
Nights, once,
Knights, well,
yeah.
yeah, they're playing Risk, an old set. The boxes split corners held with masking tape. And the first time I read that, I stopped reading at that point and missed what happened in the last part of this paragraph because I thought, is that detail good? Is that just a banal, familiar detail? Like, it's very familiar. Everyone who has ever played a board game and has had that board game for more than like 4 weeks has broken a corner on those boxes if they've played it more than 3 times. And everyone has contemplated fixing it. Some people, most people have probably even taped it. So that is the most common detail you can possibly think of for a board game box. But is it just the perfect detail right there? Like, as common and as like banal as it is, it's so familiar that it just makes this cabin like every cabin you've ever been to because it's so familiar. Is it therefore, even though it's an unremarkable detail, perfectly placed? I was like struggling with this.
I have two like very concrete thoughts on this, which
Yeah.
tells me that this is very important. And the first is that I read it almost as a way, like now that you're pointing it out again, it's like this is informing the state of this cabin. This set has been
Yes.
used, if not by them, by someone else. So it was an element of world building. If it had said that this was a brand new box, Risk is
Yeah,
one of those games that
that's true.
like people don't buy anymore. They just have always had it. So that's some element of world building. It's like we have Risk. I don't think I've ever played it, but like it exists. You know what I mean? It just exists. And then my other reaction is more in line with what you said. Like, is this a perfect detail? And like I remember like one of the things I used to do in high school English. I read every single book and found myself loving every single book to the point where like as a 16-year-old Jane Eyre spoke to me in deep ways that it does not even speak to me now. But I felt such like profound connection to the story that I would underline parts of text that had nothing to do with my assignment and everything to do with articulating something to your point as banal and common and perfect
Oh,
to like
yeah.
a regular human experience. And that is when I understood the power of fiction. So like it almost doesn't matter to me. I get off on little lines like that. And if it stops you in your tracks, I think it's probably perfect. If you recognize it so thoroughly and yet it has never been articulated, shouldn't it be? Shouldn't the most common things be articulated? Maybe we would
Yeah.
fight less if we all realized that like things like this are common for
They're so
everyone.
common.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it is perfect.
But that's why I stopped at it because it was like usually their advice is to find like that really encapsulating detail. There's just like that thing that nobody notices, that kind of like
Yeah, that you're
thing.
a
But
clever writer.
yeah, your cleverness is showing through here. But then this is such a ordinary, universal detail that it
Right.
does speak to something that like everyone has noticed. And I mean, is it the first detail a new writer would even come up with?
Yes,
Because
right. Or did they have to search for it, reach for it?
yeah, so I don't know. I don't have an answer to my question. Your answer is good. I was just made me think about it.
Well, I mean, the fact that you thought about it is that's something. Wherever you land on it, it's like that little phrase stands out.
That's because I can't. I'm reading this for the podcast. I I
Yeah,
stop at
you're
every
right.
other line. I'm like, should I comment on that for the podcast? His name's Jacob. Should I say something about that?
No, it's biblical, of course.
Yeah, I watched an interview with, oh, I sent it to everybody, that interview with Richard Powers, and he was
Yeah.
talking about picking words that you're unexpected words.
Yes.
The interviewer like brought a quote from his book, the way he used some like word at the end of the introduction to that sentence, and he was like, you don't expect that word there. And so it makes you like think about it. And it's like, so that's part of his writing thing is like, don't go for the easy word. You find an interesting, arresting kind of moment for your descriptions. And this seemed like the opposite of that.
Yeah, yeah,
Although it
yeah,
was
yeah.
arresting for me as a reader. So
Right, yeah. Yeah, either way, either way. Did
yeah.
something to you. Very good. Well, thanks, guys. If you enjoyed this episode, consider joining our Patreon. Your support helps us keep the show running. Find out more at patreon.com/whyisthisgoodpodcast. And for industry news, writing tips, and great short fiction, join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Naples Writers Workshop. You can also subscribe to our monthly newsletter at napleswritersworkshop.com.